Hello, everyone, and welcome to another one of our TEPSA Presents episodes. My name is Todd Neslony. I'm the Director of Culture and Strategic Leadership here at the Texas Elementary Principals and Supervisors Association. Twice a month, we try to bring you different TEPSA Presents episodes to dive into and discuss and think about. And as an association, when we saw the horrendous acts that haven't just been happening recently, but have been happening for the last years, decades, hundreds of years, where we've seen the amount of racism and brutality against unarmed Black men and women in our country today. We wanted to have a timely and open and honest conversation about this as an association. And so when we thought about three names to invite today, we wanted to make sure that they were names that were well respected, people that we love and adore, that we wanted to bring. There were so many to come to the table, but the three I brought with you today that I'm going to let them share their perspectives and have their voices be amplified. But I'm excited to welcome my three friends today. So I'm going to have them introduce who they are before we jump into our conversation. And so we'll start on the end. Jofee, you want to begin?
Hi, I'm Jofee Tremain. I am a building principal with Trinity Basin Preparatory located in Fort Worth. I have the proud privilege of serving pre-K3 students through 8th grade every day, and I love it.
Thank you, Jofee. Dana?
Hello, I am Dana Boyd. I am a principal in the Ysleta Independent School District, currently the principal of East Point Elementary School, but gladly getting ready to be the proud principal of Parkland Elementary School, which is a kinder through 5th grade elementary school.
Thank you. And our last but not least, Brian?
Good evening, everyone. I'm Brian Keith Harris II. I'm the Director of Outplacement and Graduate Support at the Bishop Walker School for Boys in Washington, D.C. Also the founder of Cultivating Young Kings and Sons of Freedom Dance Institute, and happy to be here with you this evening.
Well, first of all, from everybody at TEPSA, we would like to thank you three for being willing to be open and honest and have this conversation about being Black in America today. I know that as I've talked to many of my friends of color, the conversation has constantly stemmed around. I know that you three are emotionally spent and with having these conversations constantly. So I appreciate and value your time today and coming and sharing your perspective on some of these things today. And so I kind of want to start with the conversation of, what is your own personal experience like? What was it like growing up Black in America that many people who aren't Black don't understand what that was like? And we'll start with you, Jofee.
So I had the opportunity to grow up in a military household. So half of my life I was raised overseas and had an opportunity to meet people internationally. I learned to speak German, went to a German preschool and stayed in that environment, and had an opportunity to come back and forth throughout the states. We're from a small town in Georgia, Elberton, Georgia. So every once in a while we'd stop in there. We were in Savannah, Georgia, places like that. But so any experience that I had, I'll be honest, a lot of my stuff I was unaware of until it was brought to my attention, either by someone who wasn't a family member, or my mom would quietly pull me to the side and explain to me what was happening. So that's really my experience, just growing up overseas and coming back to the States. And overseas, we're behind. So anything that happened in the States, we would find out 6 to 8 months later. So we, like the Cabbage Patch Dolls came out, we had no idea they came out until like 6 to 7 months later. And then that was my experience. And so I really, coming back to the States is when you start to see reality set in a lot.
Dana, what about your experience?
My experience, I would say, could be a little bit different. Growing up in El Paso, Texas, which is a predominantly Hispanic culture where there isn't a lot of African Americans. So I would say growing up in El Paso, Texas, I found myself trying to be like the Hispanics here. So many times in elementary school, I was called the N-word, and I found myself trying to adapt myself to be like the Hispanics that I was growing around. So it was my parents that actually moved me from the area where we were growing up to be able to say, you're Black, and you need to be able to assimilate to who you are. I really can't say that I experienced a lot of racism here in El Paso as an African American. Most of my racism growing up Black would have to be as an adult. That's where I experienced it, because growing up as a child in El Paso, Texas, I didn't experience that. I think everybody accepted me. Those words were just words, I believe, that they heard from maybe their parents, or they might have been saying the color Black. Negro is the color Black. So not maybe saying it in a negative annotation. Could or could be not, but that's the culture here. So I would say most of my racism that I experienced would have to be as an adult, and when I would travel outside of El Paso, within different parts of Texas, and then of course around the US.
Brian, what about your experience?
Yep. So I grew up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. And I grew up in with a very loving family, very big family, very religious family. And so much of my experiences were shaped by having a strong faith as well as education. And so for me, as a elementary school student and even middle school student, I went to school in a very diverse community. But my family moved to the Northern Virginia area when I was 14 years old, going to the 11th grade. And it was then that I encountered my first experiences with discrimination, with prejudice, and with racism. I went to McLean High School in McLean, Virginia. And if anybody knows about McLean High School, it is not a very diverse place. And so me coming to the school, one, being a transfer student, and two, being a young Black male, I was met with a lot of adversity. And there was a lot of proving my intelligence and proving who I was during that time. And so grew up, loving and being proud of my Blackness, and then going to a high school, finishing up a high school where I kind of, got shocked, and it was a different experience. And so from then, I kind of learned how I would navigate through the world, dealing with prejudice, dealing with discrimination, and being a Black man in this country.
Your experiences that you share, what I value about you three is you come from very different backgrounds, but you can see the similarities that lie between you three just because of the color of your skin. And thinking about, a lot of what y'all talked about was things you dealt with as a child or growing up, but thinking about you now as an adult and as a professional in even education, what struggles have you found that you feel have been a direct reflection just of the color of your skin? Jofee?
My first experience as a teacher, my first year, I would run into situations where a parent would call me and we would schedule a meeting, and they would show up and say, "Oh, you don't look like you sound." So I dealt with a lot of that as a classroom teacher, and so you learn in the moment the proper way to respond. The way I was raised, same thing as Brian, just in a household where Christ was the center, and you learned how to properly respond, and you were taught that not everybody has the same mindset as you. So if you want to bring people to the kingdom, you have to respond in such a way that they see Christ in you no matter what. And so that is what has been instilled in me at all times. And so when that father said that to me my very first time as a classroom teacher, I said, well, I hope I don't ruin your first experience with me. And I just kind of giggled it off, and he giggled it off. And then we kept talking. Little did I know, years later, he would end up giving his life to Christ, and we would be on the same worship team. So if I had ended up saying something to him that was disrespectful, and it could have derailed him, that could have been a whole different situation. So in those moments when those kind of things occur, it's not to excuse behavior. It's an opportunity for me to be able in that moment to show them another way to respond. And I hope that I keep the conversation open, that we're able to have those conversations, because that's really what I want to do.
Dana, and I think what you bring up is a very not Dana, I'm sorry, Jofee. What you bring up is a very powerful point about, being a white male educator is never something I've ever had to experience with somebody come and saying something like that. And I can see those comments happening and how they can eat at you and just make you feel like you weren't good enough to be who you are. And so thank you for sharing that story. Dana, what about you?
Pretty similar to Jofee said, or the comments of you're proper, you speak
Mhm.
proper. Why do you speak proper like that? People's stereotypes, I would say, as an educator, that they feel that you're an aggressive Black woman because they have a stereotype of Black women being stereotype or aggressive women when we're nurturing beings just like anybody else. It's part of our culture of who we are. And once people are able to see who we are as individuals, then those stereotypes begin to break. But I also believe, Todd, and just I give you a prime example. Just yesterday, I received a phone call from someone. The new school that I'm moving into has actually a bigger population of African American students. And the comment was, congratulations, but they know, they moved you because there's more Blacks there. And there's this whole Black Lives Matter, right? So even though, and they kind of laughed about it, right? So even with comments like that people think it's a joking way, there's just even racial biases in regards to that not looking at me as a person and my leadership capacity and abilities, but just because you're at a certain part of town, that they feel that only Black administrators can be at Black schools and that they can't be at schools where there's a bigger population of white or Hispanic population. So and even as a TEPSA member, the one that I'll never forget when I won TEPSA, the NDP, was I had a Caucasian principal say, I don't understand why you won. What is it that you have that none of us have? And that's as an adult. Yeah. So, there is, it's there. It's never gone away. And I believe as African American women, especially, we've always got to be 10 steps ahead or got to be rising up a little bit higher, because the first thing that people will ever see with all of us is the color of our skin first. No matter what, people are always going to look at our color of our skin first before any type of capabilities or abilities or whatever it is that we bring. The first thing that they see is our Black skin, no matter what.
Wow, thank you, Dana, for sharing that. That was really powerful. And I can't even imagine what was going through your head when whoever said that to you. God. Brian, what about you?
Yeah, so I think mine is a little different. I have had the opportunity to really be selective in the school environments and the schools in which I really wanted to pour into young people. And so I have had the opportunity to have amazing connections with families, with staff, and with school leaders, where the color of my skin or who I was never came into question. However, there is a small shift. The shift is I have had to, and even currently, constantly walk what I call a fine line between my blackness and my intelligence. Because oftentimes, when a black man comes to, and let me back up, my blackness and my intelligence with other stakeholders or board members or people that were outside of our actual school. And so when a black man, a black educated man comes to a board meeting, or engages in conversation about curriculum, engages in conversation about reform or anything dealing with education, it's always a fine line, because that people are looking, one, to hear what you're going to say, two, they may have preconceived notions about what you believe and think about education, and then three, they may believe that your passion oftentimes is aggression. And so I am so passionate about education and so passionate about Black and Brown children that I have had to constantly and consistently walk a fine line, as not to, in a real sense, come off as being aggressive, right? And so I think that's a struggle. And I think that's a struggle for many people, many school leaders who may not have a direct struggle in their actual school building, may not have a struggle with families, may not have struggles with community partners, but the struggle becomes when we're encountering other stakeholders and other board members who don't look like us, who
Yes.
don't share our experiences, and who, in a real sense, have used what society has said about us, the stereotypes society has said about us, against us in a real sense. And so I think that's kind of been my experiences. But I've also had the experience where I've just said, listen, I'm going to be all of me. I'm going to be authentically me. We are encouraging our kids to be their authentic selves. And so I got to a point, Todd, where I just said, listen, I don't care how you're perceiving how I'm presenting this information. I'm passionate. I know what I'm talking about as it relates to the quality of education for our children. And I'm gonna be my authentic self.
One question that hearing you three talk, my thought goes straight to, how do you not let those thoughts of others and those words of others just destroy you and keep you, because all three of you have done incredible work. And never once have I looked at any of the work that you three have done and thought they did that because they were Black. But I know that you have faced so many micro and macro aggressions along the way. How do you not let those words and thoughts debilitate you? And anybody
Yeah,
can jump in and answer that.
I think one of the ways, for me, just me personally, is something that Jofee said, which is, God,
Yes.
going back to spirit and
Yeah.
understanding that,
Absolutely.
God called me for this time to work with this
Mhm.
group of young people, to work with
Absolutely.
these teachers, and to work in this building. And so
Mhm.
I'm not going to allow anyone who has a
Mhm.
limited perspective of themselves and then others to deter the passion and the calling that I know that I have. So that's kind of
Absolutely.
one practical way. But another way that I deal with it is by continuing to make sure that when I go into those meetings, when I have those conversations, that I'm speaking intelligently about what
Mhm.
I'm talking about, right?
Absolutely.
A perfect example is I walked into a board meeting, and the board members, perhaps had a perceived notion. In fact, I know
Mhm.
they did because of the questions they asked. But then when I came back with all of the data to support
Mhm.
what I was saying, the understanding was he knows what he's talking about. And so
Absolutely.
I think one of the ways, and this is for educators, this is for school leaders, one of the ways to make sure that you emerge, if you will, from the debris of prejudice or discrimination or comments or words, one of the ways to emerge is to be invested and to know what you're talking about, to
Mm-hmm.
study, to research, to make sure that what you're saying about children, what you're saying about curriculum, what you're saying about data, whatever you're talking about, that you're 100% knowledgeable about, because people can perceive anything they want about you, but people can't alter too much from data.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. I would
That's right.
totally agree with everything that you said. And also the fact that many people want you to react because that's the stereotype that they're looking for. So as much as it's hurting us inside, or as angry as we will not, I always say when they go low, we go high. I really respect that. And the faith base, I want to say many African American leaders are not afraid to talk about their faith out loud, because that's who we are. That's our history. Negro spirituals, this, that, or the other. So that faith based, that's our culture, and that's who we are. So I agree and practice what you preach and walk the talk. Absolutely, walk the talk, Todd. And I think it's through that and building those relationships that's where that culture shift or those biases start to change, and where those racial barriers are like, okay, maybe they do know what they're talking about. So that's what I can say as far as my experience coming into a school that never had a Black principal ever, 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 and to be able to change that mindset and to be able to see how that culture shift happened is to bring them on. But also educate them about our culture. They've never seen that many African American books since I've been at that school. So you also have to be able to educate them about our culture and all cultures, not just us, but all cultures. Because if we don't, no one will.
Right.
Right. That's
And
great.
yeah, and for me, I replay a scenario. It's a real story in my head. My mom was a Boy Scout leader, and she was at the mall, and I was with her. and a little boy in her group walked up to her, and my mom knelt down and she said, "Can you please take this over there?" And he said to her, my dad said, "I don't listen to ends." And he called her the word. And that was the first time I connected with that word meant. I'd heard it, but it didn't connect with me. And I watched my mom kneel down and she said, "Well, lucky for you, sweetheart, you're not talking to one today. So will you please take this over there and move on about your business?" That's how I learned to use
That's good.
the situation to turn things around. I learned that from my mom. And my mom had no idea I saw her do that. I talked to my mom last week and told her all about this. And I mentioned that situation to her. And she said, "You saw that?" I said, "Yes, ma'am. I watched how you made sure in that moment that little boy was not made to feel bad about something that he learned. But you used the situation, you took control over it, and then you moved it on. And you also made sure that whatever response you gave, you didn't know who was watching, but you wanted them to see something in you that everybody else needs to have. You can draw people in." And so I told my mom, I said, "Girl, you have got something," because in that moment, what I had in my heart was not what she had. I wanted to go tear that kid up because I heard him say something to my mom that wasn't okay. But my mom's response was so powerful. I wanted what she had. And what I found out later, because we all grew up in the church, but my mom had a relationship. I was there, but my mom's relationship with Christ, I said, "Oh, I need that," because that kept her from doing something crazy. That is what's in me, and that's what keeps me from falling apart when you hear stuff. Because Dana's right, a lot of my stuff, I've had stuff happen as a kid. My mom was good about, my dad was there too, but he's in the military, he's traveling, he's doing stuff. But my mom, she was able to get in there and swoop us out of that stuff so fast we never knew what was happening. That woman she was slick. But as we got older, you were in the world and reality is smacking you in the face. And that's where you got to be able to decide in the moment. Do I want to be that? Because we didn't have social media like we do now. So do I want to be that viral sensation, or do I want to be the person that when they go home that night, I was treated with respect by somebody today, and I may not have treated them that way, but maybe that's the person I want to go talk to, and that's what I'm called to do. I'm called to do something totally different. I'm called to lead this campus, which is a totally different campus for me to lead. Every place I've been, I've always been the only one. And I'm okay with that. And the way we were raised, you're not the only one if you're willing to find a commonality with somebody on that campus. And if I can find a commonality with somebody on my campus, then we're good. We're not going to be the only one. And that's how I do it.
Hey, Todd, I want to jump in and say real quickly, I love that. One, I could hear my own mother saying some of those things too. But I just want to go back quickly because I think our upbringing and things we experienced in our childhood helps us during struggles like these. And I think one of the things that I alluded to, but I just want to make it, explicit, is that I grew up in a family where being your authentic self was championed. Every single opportunity I had to be my artistic, happy, crazy, whatever self, my parents championed that. And so I went into school thinking, well, I'm just being myself. And so what it did was it caused me to almost be blind to the things that were happening around me because I showed up 100% who I was. And I think when I go into these situations with adults or in a professional setting, I still carry that. I'm just going in 100% Brian, who's passionate, who knows what he's talking about, and who, in a real sense, is going to treat you with the same level of respect that you give him. And I think that has really helped to carry me and allow me to be in situations and not even know that a struggle actually was there.
Right. Todd, if I could just jump in also really quick, is just that, and with that situation, it's our job as leaders to advocate for our Black and brown children, our boys and girls, when they are with non-Black or white teachers, when they're quick to judge them about their reactions. Or for instance, a Black girl is so aggressive the way that they ask.
Right.
And it's not about them being aggressive, it's the way that they've been raised. So, and educating our teachers about who our culture is, that don't be so quick to judge because a mama comes in braids and got long nails, that they don't care about their kid also. So that's also where those biases come up to. And it's our job to be able to educate those teachers. I had them read Ghost Boys today. I read Mr. Lincoln's Way so that they are able to see that, I mean, nobody knew about Emmett Till. And then it's just like, what do you mean y'all didn't know about Emmett Till? Teach us, and now, things came up and it's like those connections, and then had kids reading about that, because Ghost Boys was not a book that they were going to read, but they can tell you everything about Martin Luther King, so it's up to us when we're put in those opportunities to educate not only our Black students, but all of our students and the teachers too, because if you don't open them up to anything class Martin Luther King, then they're not going to go past that. So,
and she's right.
Yes.
She's right, because when I taught I used Emmett Till to connect with the class, and I said, move past the fact of him being a Black boy. I said, he's a young man, something occurred, he was given directions, he did something different, this is what ended up happening. How can you connect? When you can create a story for kids to connect to, and they start to see themselves, but you got to help people get past that. Right. It can be powerful. So yes, I mean, Emmett Till was one of the favorite stories that I used in class a lot with my students.
Yes.
Yeah, and I think too that oftentimes what happens, what both of you are saying, is so powerful, because we have an opportunity to teach in a way where our children, where we help to reshape the identity of our children. And identity is shaped and reshaped through the lenses of history and culture. When children develop a cultural legacy, then they understand that they're from such a powerful culture. And what's happening is that because many children don't know the story of Emmett Till, and more importantly, because many of our children don't know what happened before 1619, 1619 being the year that the first enslaved Africans were brought to America, because our children don't know what happened before 1619, they look at our history from the lenses of enslavement. And so what ends up happening is that even though we talk about how our enslaved African ancestors were resilient, even though we talk about how they were able to rise above the racism and rise above the slavery, our students are still looking at our people through the lenses of being enslaved. So it's also important for us to bring in elements of our history and culture that occurred before the time of enslavement, so that we really can shape that identity. A funny thing is that in my book that I have a poem it's a funny poem, but it's called A Haircut Like King Tut. And in a real sense, that poem was the introduction of making sure that Black and brown boys knew we get, going to the barbershop in our culture is like a weekly thing, right? It's a big deal to go to the barbershop, which is probably why so many young boys, including myself, are struggling during this time, because, going weekly, bi-weekly, it's a big thing. But when our boys began to understand that that barbering, the first barber came from ancient Kemet, known as the Black Land, currently known as Egypt, they were like, wow, my people created barbering. And so I got so many parents saying, hey, my son went to the barber and he said, did you know that your job came from Egypt? Right? Like, think about how that now has how that has shaped his identity, understanding that something that he benefits from every single week is directly connected to him. And so it's so important for us to teach those elements of history and of culture that happened pre-enslavement.
Well, I love that what you three just talked about was all about educating yourself. And, when we've got tools like Google now where we can go and educate, we have no excuse for sitting back anymore and claiming ignorance or claiming that nobody was around us to tell us that. It was like, if your circle's not big enough, social media has allowed you to connect with more, to learn from them and read. And I love that y'all brought up the book Ghost Boys by Jewel Parker Rhodes, because I love Jewel Parker Rhodes. She's one of my favorite authors, but Ghost Boys was powerful and even more timely now. So I everything y'all shared, I'm over here like, okay, I'm rewatching all of this and gonna take so many notes. throughout this. But I want to kind of shift a little bit and know, we talk about educating ourselves, and we've talked about your experience growing up. But I know the three of you either have raised your own children, are raising your own children, or are working with children in the community and helping raise them up. But a lot of people who are not Black don't understand that when you are raising kids, there's a lot of different things that you tell your kids that as a white male, I never had to imagine my mother ever having some of those conversations with me. So I kind of wanted you to share kind of your perspective of some of those conversations. So we'll start with you, Dana.
I have a son. He's 25, 26. If the police pull you over, James, keep your hands up. He drove to Tennessee, and I didn't sleep the whole time that he was there. So watch your back. Anytime that you're pulled over, I stay in complete fear for my son. Don't speed. And he's educated, a special education teacher, a football coach, very well versed. And I fear for him even in El Paso, Texas. So it's, if you get pulled over, do what they ask you to do. And no mother should have to have that fear for their son anywhere. But that's the realities of being a Black male. No matter how educated you are, your master's, your doctorates, how much money you have, people are always going to see your Black skin first. They're always going to be afraid of you, James. So as there's no other culture that's not Black that their child is going to experience that experience of going into a store, or when people move to the other side of the street when you're walking, or anything like that. So those are the realities that I tell my son. There's going to be some jobs that you probably should get that you're not going to get because you're Black. So those are the realities. For my daughter, it's about, you can't be wearing those tight pants, you can't be wearing those, you can't be hoochie mama, because people are going to judge you no matter what. So you've always got to be professional. You gotta be what you've got to rise up above everybody else, because you're going to be judged for who you are. So those are the realities, that no matter what, male, female, people, no matter what, are going to look at your skin first. And me as an adult, there's one store I'll go in every single time as an adult, and they will never ever say, "How can I help you?" And that's just the world that we're in. But we'll greet the next person that comes in. And people will say, "Well, why go in there?" Because I want my children to know that racism is still alive. Doesn't matter how much money or education, it's blatantly still there. So that's the realities of having a child. And, we can't shelter them. We need to let them know, no matter what, you grow up in the Cosby Show era or whatever, how much money you have or education, it does not matter. People are still going to see you as a Black thug, no matter what. That's the realities. Mm-mm.
Thank you, Dana.
You say Cosby Show era, and the only thing I can think of is the scene with Theo getting his ears pierced the first time, and so
I remember that.
Yeah, for we have two boys in our home, and we have taught our boys that when they leave their home, they need to look presentable. They can't just walk down the street looking as if they just woke up out of bed. Keep the hair combed, and because to me, your hair not combed, I can see it's not combed. It's not a hairstyle. Your hair is not combed, so you've got to do something about that. And so those are the grooming tips that we give our kids when they leave the home, and we've also taught them to be clear in what they need to say, be in the right places at the right time, be home when you're supposed to be home. We've done the same thing. If you get pulled over, make sure that you follow the instructions. Don't do anything, sudden movements. Both my boys have been pulled over. Both my boys have been profiled, and both my boys have handled it. And they're really good about coming home and talking to their father and I about it. And we walk them through it. We've never sheltered our boys from any conversations. We've never sheltered them from the news. Just being that type of a family, with me teaching history, my husband, with his background, we just never sheltered them. We've always used it as an opportunity to springboard conversations. So in our home, everything is open to have that conversation. And we've always have instilled in them to get both perspectives before you make a decision, And so that's right now, again, when they were being raised, we didn't have the kind of social media. It took too long to get into the computer, all those coding stuff you had to do. Now it's different. You just click it and boom, and everything's there. So now it's teaching them in this era of social media the difference between what you're hearing is it right or is it wrong? That's the issue now that we deal with them being 19 years old and 25 years old, teaching them to be able to decipher through what was put in front of them, and then also look at the standards that they've been given as kids, that foundation that's been instilled in them, and they have to weigh their options up against it and then decide how they're going to move forward. And sometimes they fail, and sometimes they do well. But that's how we've raised our boys. And is it hard for them out there? It is hard for them out there, very hard. But we've also tried to really teach them not to point fingers first. Let's stop, talk about it, see what we need to figure out to shift things the way we need to shift it, and then keep it moving. But don't ever define who you are based on what somebody has called you. Don't ever do that. That is not how you're gonna define who you are. And we just leave it at that.
Thank you, Jofee. Brian?
Yep. So I have wonderful 18-year-old Nathan, who will be 19 years old next month. So I don't want to repeat all of the things that were said, but those conversations that you guys are having, particularly Dana, with your son, are the same conversations that have been had and are being had currently with Nathan, following the instructions of police officers or law enforcement, always making sure that your hands are visible and never making any, jerking movements with your hands, constantly communicating with us. We need to know where you are at all times. I don't care how old you are or how old you think you are. You always need to communicate. As a matter of fact, I am almost a 40-year-old and I communicate with my parents. Even if I'm not in the same home as them, I'm communicating where I
Yeah,
am. That's something that is extremely important
yeah,
because we need to be able
yeah.
to know where our children are. So that's
Mhm,
important. But the other thing that I wanted to kind of share in this moment is that oftentimes when we get asked this question, because people ask us this question all the time,
mhm,
and I think what happens is that we talk a lot about what we have to do and the conversations that we have to have with our children that are in a real sense traumatic, because these are traumatic conversations to have with our children. I want to flip it just briefly to talk about the joyous and joyful conversations that we have with our children, because the conversation that I have with my son that may not be had in households where that are non-black are in the midst of all of the way that the world sees you, you're still beautiful, and you're
absolutely.
still important, and you're still worthy, and you still have worth and value. Your blackness is beautiful, because that's something else. I feel like sometimes what happens is that as a result of our boys or our girls trying to escape the ideologies of trauma, they run to the hands, or they run quickly away from who they are, their blackness. They don't hold on to their blackness because they feel like if I run away from it, then I can't be subject to it. And the reality is that we have to teach our children that in the midst of all that's going on, you still have purpose, you still have
Mhm,
value, and your life is just as worth it as anybody else. Because if we don't have that conversation, then the danger that we have is that our children will be walking dead. They will be, in a real sense, zombies waiting for the next person to pull them over, or waiting for the next person to kill them, and not doing the things that they need to do. The very last thing that I always tell Nathan is really the benefit of financial freedom. We cannot
mhm.
overshadow that. We cannot overlook that at all. We need to teach our children the beauty of financial freedom, being an
Absolutely.
entrepreneur. Why do I say that? When you look at 1921, when you look at Tulsa, Oklahoma, and those 300 Black owned businesses where that block, Wall Street, in a real sense, that block or that neighborhood in a real sense, those were our people being entrepreneurs, really disassociating or disconnecting from the system that oppressed them in an effort for them to create a new world system, and it was burned down. When you think about Rosewood, you think about those same ideologies of here our people became entrepreneurs and was burned down. So one of the conversations with Nathan is, if you want to live out of oppression, or if you want to live adjacent from oppression. You need to become an entrepreneur. And you also need to do something that is going to help your community. So in the midst of all of this, yes, you need to pay attention to this, but these are the things that you can do. You need to be an advocate, whatever that means, whatever that looks like. You need to also be an advocate for your community.
Absolutely. Todd, Todd, can I jump in and say something? Because you gave us the rawness to be able to say something. So I'm looking at the comments in the chat box, and I appreciate the comments that are being written in the chat box. But one of the things that I want to say is I don't want people to feel sorry for us as Black people.
Right.
I don't want people to feel sorry for us. I want people to advocate and change the behavior. So, people are saying, I have 3 boys of my own and I feel bad that this, that, or the other, or we've got to do something to change it. Or now everybody on social media is Black Lives Matter and it becomes a temporary Band-Aid. I want, if we are going to feel this, then as educators, as TEPSA, then it needs to be embedded consistently for us to be able to do something. So we've given you stories. So what is it that you all are going to do that to be able to change that behavior in the areas that you are? We don't need sympathy. We don't need pity, but we're only going to be able to change the behavior of our non-Black counterparts by you listening to what we're saying. And we need you all to embrace our Black and brown girls and boys and letting them know and validating the things that we're saying. And not just, I'm saying, I got blasted for saying all lives matter. All lives do matter. This is not just about Black Lives Matter. All lives matter. And I understand, yes, there's horrible things happening and have been happening to African Americans, but don't feel sorry for us. Change the behavior in the areas that you're doing. If you see the things that we're saying, then in your school buildings, what is it that you're going to do to empower those little Black boys and little Black girls that are your building? What are you going to do to empower your teachers to be able to change? And it might not even be stereotypes. It's just that their lack of knowledge to be able to deal with that. So I really, in the position of TEPSA, in the position that all of the people that are logged on, please don't feel sorry for us. Empower us by changing the situation in the position that you've been put in. Everyone's logged on here for a reason. What are you going to do about it? Don't just listen to us for an hour and say, oh, that was good, this, that, or the other. What are you going to do to take it a step further to change the behavior so that these chains are broken? There's a song that says break every chain. So what is it that you are going to do? Just not a Black song. What are we going to do to be able to break the chain? So that's a challenge to all of you all that's out there.
I would
Hey,
also
Todd, and
add
I
to that.
also want to, in that same vein, I want to say that there are, in my opinion, 2 types of pedagogy. We talk about feeling sorry. There's no need to feel sorry. There's need to change, and there's need for reform.
Yeah.
And so there are some things that need to happen from our educators who are not Black, right? And one of the things is changing our pedagogy. And one of the ways that we change our pedagogy is through a book that is by Bell Hooks that is titled Teaching to Transgress. Teaching to Transgress by Bell Hooks. And in that book, Bell Hooks, she talks about a pedagogy that is called engaged pedagogy. And what that really talks about is understanding the importance of not just academic achievement, but understanding the importance of the soul of our children. When you understand the importance of the soul of our children, you then will make sure that our children are understanding their history, their culture, and how history and culture shapes identity. And so if we want to think about what are the things that I can do, pick up the book, read the book, and then embrace that pedagogy and allow that pedagogy to be filtered through every part of your teaching. Not only do we need to have engaged pedagogy, but there also needs to be culturally responsive pedagogy. And that's like a buzzword, but it's not many actions. It's a word, not action. So when you talk about culturally responsive pedagogy, what you're really saying is that you are going to take the time to understand the culture of students so that you do not allow your own biases to affect your teaching them. This is what I mean by that. Dana talked about this before. She talked about, you know, mom coming to school with braids or kids coming, different ways, and teachers being quick to judge them. The reason why we're quick to judge them or you're quick to judge them It's because you don't understand the origin of what the action is. You see the action, and because of your own level of bias and your own unfamiliarity with that culture, you make a quick judgment. So the way to really change is for you to be invested in learning what we call agency, the agency of Black culture. So we think about it. Why is it in a real sense, this is something practical. Why is it that Black children oftentimes may be late to school? Well, multiple things, right? One portion, you don't know how many children were dropped off before that child got to school, right? You don't know what issues arose prior to that child getting there. But even more importantly, when we take it all the way back, in a real sense, here's a quick example. A mom and child are walking out the door getting ready for school. A family member calls and says, "Hey, my car is broken down. I need you to help." In our culture, we're going to go help that family member get that car fixed. And it's not because we're being lazy. It's not because we don't think education is important. It's because we value family. And so when you, as an educator who's not Black, begin to understand those cultural nuances, you then will be able to teach our children free of your implicit bias. Very last one. Very last one is what I call, this is my own Mr. Harris, Brian Harris coining. I'm still working on it, but it's called culturally spiritual pedagogy. See, because when we talk about the spirit of our children, the soul is different, right? Soul, history, family, rituals, tradition, culture, spirit, intellect, creativity, passion. In order for us to change the narrative of our children, we must incorporate their passion, their creativity, and their intellect in the conversation. What that means is that you can't be the only relevant voice in your classroom. We know you're the teacher, but you can't be the only relevant voice. You have to allow your children to lead instruction. You have to allow your children's creativity and your children's intellect and your children's passion and their thoughts about how education should be to lead the conversation. When we talk about Ghost Boys, one of the reasons why my school chose Ghost Boys is because our fifth grade would not stop talking about it, right? We have to read this book. And so that was brought into the classroom. That was a great example of our children using their own creativity or their own intellect to bring in or be a part of education. And we call that equity-centered community design. When it's equitable because everybody in the space, teacher and student, are all invested in the learning process. So engaged pedagogy, bell hooks, culturally responsive pedagogy all over Google, and culturally spiritual pedagogy all with me, no book yet. Those are the kinds of things that can happen in order for us to do that. Last thing, and I am done. The last thing is that we have to be an advocate for Black educators, for Black education, for Black children. And the way to be an advocate is to challenge the systems that foster and facilitate inequity and inequality. How do you foster and facilitate, or how do you challenge that system? Easy. You find books, you find literature, you find curriculum that includes the experiences, the stories, and the identity of all your children, not just some of your children.
Absolutely.
That's the way that you do that. So don't feel sorry for us. Pick up a book, change your pedagogy, and challenge the system through the things that you can do in your classroom today or tomorrow or in the fall when school starts again.
No, that's too late. Tomorrow.
Right. Tomorrow.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
That's right.
Yes.
Jofee, were you going to add
Change
something?
it up.
Yeah, I was just going to say, adding to what they're saying, I think it's also important that we are willing to have conversations, because some of us can be off-putting in how we respond. Well, you don't know that, or how dare you ask me that question, or whatever. There's some things that we have got to do better to be able to allow conversations to occur and don't take offense. People don't know what they don't know. And so I would much rather someone fall on their face or fail with me,
Yeah.
and I can help pick them up and show them the right way,
Mm-hmm.
versus making them feel bad because they did not understand the question, didn't understand. I had a teacher ask me once, why does she do this all the time? I said, honey, her braids are itching. That's why she's doing that. Oh, I didn't realize that's what she was doing. And I was just trying. I said, no, it's fine. Her mama won't let her scratch in there because she just got a hair done. I mean, those are conversations that some people will not be willing to have because, number one, they feel like it's a waste of time. And number two, you get easily offended. But for me, I was so happy that she was willing to come ask me that question. I wasn't offended. Now she has a better understanding. So when that girl walked in her class and went like this, she wasn't trying to be disrespectful or signal to somebody across the room. She
You want me
truly
to do this
was
right
trying.
now? Look,
Yeah, she's trying to keep her hair tight.
I've been
But it's
wanting
just,
to itch since
That's
we
right.
began over here, but I can't do
That's
it because
right.
and mine too, you know, because I'm keeping track. Is it looking good? What are you doing?
That's right.
And it's
That's right.
just, but you
I
know,
got my oil right here.
That's
that's
right.
how we started. I know it doesn't last.
So true.
But it's just so
I got
beautiful.
my pen. Look, here's the pen right here. Right here.
I got a pencil.
Todd, you don't know anything about that. I'm sorry, Todd. You can't identify, but we just showed you something. When
Yes.
it itches, we just get the pen and we're like, boop,
See
boop, boop, boop,
something
boop, boop,
real
boop,
close. It
boop.
doesn't
Okay.
nothing to do. Absolutely.
Yes.
But it's just those simple little things that, you know, if I had made her feel bad about it, she would have just felt awful. She never would have been able to connect with the students. So I am thankful that people, I had somebody call me today and ask me a question about something that she said, I know I can ask you. I'm honored with that. When somebody calls me and feels safe, I can ask you. You won't make me feel bad. I love that. I get that all the time and I just love it. Right. You know, it's just beautiful. And if that's what my purpose is, that I can help people have conversations and feel safe enough to do it, then I'm doing it. And I won't change it.
You know, y'all said so many incredible things there. I really hope that people, after they watch this today, will go back and rewatch this conversation because I think there is so much to take away. I know Brian is dropping in and out. We're trying to get his video fixed. So Brian, if you can hear
Sorry.
us, we can't get your video. So try to exit out, Brian, and come back in again. We'll try to get that. But one thing that I really hear you three saying today, and I want to make sure our listeners hear as well, is that idea of no, stop the sympathy, get your butt into gear, and have some actionable steps. Whether that means you're reading to educate yourself, you're Googling, you're talking to other people, you're having those conversations, you know, have all of that in play so that you can be truly getting better. And like you said, Dana, don't wait till the fall. Don't
Right.
wait till later. And so you've got to have those kind of things in place. And I've always said too, you know, I feel like I want people to hear this too, that you're not learning if you're not uncomfortable.
Right.
And so if what you're reading and learning about, you still are like, oh yeah, that's okay. Yeah. Then you're not learning enough because until you are made uncomfortable in what you've been raised with, you know, it doesn't get any, you're not really taking things in. And so as we wrap the conversation up, I'd love to end with this question. People watching today, there's a lot they could take away, but if there's just one thing you want them to take away today, what's kind of your one takeaway? Dana, we'll start with you.
I already said the one takeaway. Do something. Don't wait. Do something. That's my call to action. And for those that are in the position, including you, Todd, someone just said right now, when I went to the TEPSA conference in Rockwall, there was not a single panel member who looks like this panel. You know, so Texas is a big state, and you've been put in a position that you can now let things like this happen. So if God, like we have said, puts you in a place to be able to provide action, then do it. Don't wait, because what's going to happen if that's one of your kids that end up on the news saying, I can't breathe, and you have the opportunity to be able to change the culture in which God has placed you in. We don't want that to happen to any of us. So take the call to action tomorrow. Someone said take the call to action yesterday. So that would be my thing to say.
Awesome. Jofee?
I think for me is don't get caught up in a hype that's not yours. You know, so if that is not your stance, then don't follow that. You've got to start with yourself first. Figure out who you are first in this world, in this society, and figure out what your biases are, and figure out what you've got to let go of to allow change to occur within yourself. Because once you can let go of whatever it is that's hindering you from being your very best, then you can be your very best for others that are seeking for understanding. And in order for people to seek first for that understanding from somebody that they want to connect with, you've got to know yourself better. And so that to me is my takeaway from all this. You've got to know who you are. You've got to know where your foundations start. Start asking people in your family. Start just having those conversations. And then once you figure out who you are within yourself, be ready for people to come and seek responses from you. And if you don't have a good answer for them, please don't give them an answer that is not true. Don't call them to an action as something that's not their action to be called to. Some people just don't need to be a part of it. They need to be a part of it in a whole different way. And maybe for some of them, it could be their call is when they are driving somebody to the grocery store. That is how they need to, be a part of that change. Not everybody needs to be a part of the same, like, we all don't need to make this change the same way. We're not all called to do things the same way. We need to respect each other's views and actions and the way we're going about making change, because we're not all supposed to do it the same way.
And I love those steps. And I'm really glad, as you pointed out, Dana, that somebody in the comments said, I went to the TEPSA conference in Rockwall and there wasn't a single panel member who looked like me. Because I think, at this time, we have to hold everyone accountable. We've got to hold TEPSA accountable. We've got to hold our schools accountable. We've got to hold our districts accountable in making sure that we are doing it better. And I can say from behind the scenes here at TEPSA, we have been having those conversations of there needs to be representation that matches the kids we serve in this state, the staff we serve as well, because if we aren't having those conversations, it's not going to change. And if people aren't holding us accountable, we're not going to do it any better. And so I can speak right now for TEPSA to say that is, you're going to see a lot of changes moving forward to make sure that is more representative, because the reason things haven't gotten better is we haven't had enough of these conversations where it came behind more than just talking, where action and follow through actually took place as well. And so I from the bottom of my heart, thank you so much, you three. I know Brian, his video's messing up. He's not able to join with us back in. I've been trying to get him to join, but something's wrong with his video. But I know that what I would say to you three is, I am so appreciative that you were willing to come and have this conversation today. I know that, like I said at the top of this conversation, this has been a very emotionally exhausting time right now, and adding one more thing to your plate is a lot to ask. But I really feel like these conversations, and by seeing some of the comments as well, that your words are impacting others and are going to keep that train moving of change happening. So I hope that everybody listening today or watching, I hope that you go out, you educate yourselves, you buy those books, you advocate for all kids. Advocate for all staff members, and you advocate for all families, because if you are going to be a leader who is in this field to serve kids, you can't serve just one group of kids. And you've got to be educating yourself and making yourself and your staff a little bit uncomfortable in the conversations. So from me and from TEPSA, thank you three for joining this conversation today.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.